Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the Friday weekend edition, and we are so grateful that you could join us. And in about a half an hour, we're going to actually commence what we do so often here on a Friday. We'll have Dr. Merrill Matthews, who's resident scholar with the Institute for Policy Innovation, and we'll also have Kelly Shackelford, who is the Chief Counsel for First Liberty Institute. And we'll spend the rest of this first hour maybe talking about some of the things happening in Texas politics, because a disproportionate number of you listening during this particular hour are in Texas. But even if you're not, some of the things we'll be talking about in terms of the legislature, in terms of the Attorney General, will probably apply to your state. And then in the national hour, we'll get into all the issues. This is the first time we've had these roundtable experts with us. Before, we have had, first of all the things happening with Parler and social media and the rest. And so we'll certainly be talking about that. We'll also be talking about the impeachment vote and the future trial, future Biden administration, and much, much more. But we began a series which we will continue for some time, for actually taken on a Friday, the first half hour, spending some time talking with our good friend Dr. Doug Groothuis. He wrote a book called Philosophy in 7 Sentences. Last week, we spent some time talking about the chapter on Protagoras. Today, we want to talk about Socrates. Dr. Doug Groothuis has been on the program with us many times before, has his bachelor's degree as well as his doctorate from the University of Oregon, a master's degree in philosophy from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, author of many books back in the days when Marlon Maddox used to interview him: Unmasking the New Age, Confronting the New Age, Revealing the New Age Jesus. Of course, I also had a chance to do some of those interviews, and of course, we have more recently talked about everything from his book, Christian Apologetics, a comprehensive case for Christian faith, which is now being revised, so I'm looking forward to seeing that, and his book, Truth Decay, to mention many others. Doug Groothuis, always great to have you on the program.
Thank you. Happy to be with you.
Let's get into Socrates. One of the things I love is that each one of these particular chapters starts with a sentence. The unexamined life is not worth living. Of course, a little bit later you talk about there might be a little bit of hyperbole there, but the point that Socrates was making is, as a philosophical conversationalist that you describe, was to go around asking questions. Even to this day, we talk about using the Socratic method of teaching. And so we owe quite a bit, not only in terms of philosophy and the content, but even the style to Socrates, don't we?
We do. And I think that his statement, the unexamined life is not worth living, is kind of a tonic for our time, because we can often speak without having thought things through very carefully, especially on matters that we become passionate about, particularly now, politics, but always religion, morality, and so on. And I don't look to Socrates as having the final answers on these questions. I ultimately look to Jesus for that. And I think actually Jesus was a philosopher, but I think we already did an interview on that a few years ago. But Socrates was considered a gadfly, so he would ask questions. Sometimes they were embarrassing or difficult questions. He would roam around ancient Athens and ask people things like, what is justice? What is truth? What does the good life mean? And so he was not a person to be hired to defend your own views. Those were the sophists. They could be hired to make a case for just about anything. But Socrates was really a freelance, peripatetic thinker. He walked around, asked questions, and inspired people to think through matters very carefully. He was also considered a midwife in the sense that he helped give birth to thoughts. And he's known, as you mentioned, for this method of asking questions and then following up. So we know of his work really through dialogues, many of which are recorded by the great philosopher and his student Plato.
Yes. And, you do point out the fact that in some respects it is interesting that he has been so significantly revered because he founded no school. He was certainly had no groupies and a lot of other things. Of course, we know how he ended, but it still is, I think, an illustration of the impact of that phrase. And let's come back to that phrase, examine, because he talks about the idea of the unexamined life. If I can make a parallel to one of the things that is actually recorded in the book of Acts, it says that the Bereans were those who examined the scriptures daily to see if what Paul taught was true or what anyone teaches is true. So this idea of examine, for Socrates, he was looking at it just in terms of this belief that there is truth and we can maybe discover truth. For us as Christians, when we talk about examine, we want to see how that parallels with Scripture. How do you put those two together? Those are very different, but still very relevant questions, aren't they?
Right. Well, if I were a better scholar, I'd be able to go to the Greek in both cases. But since I'm not, we can certainly talk about the basic idea. And Socrates wanted us to think through the most meaningful questions of life in terms of where we come from, who we are, where are we going, how should we order our life together, what should our religious beliefs be. So examining something is not just giving it a cursory read, just perusing something or saying something off the top of your head. Examining means to have some intellectual fortitude and patience. And I think it's encouraging that Scripture tells us that the Bereans were noble for examining what Paul said and testing it against the Scripture. Because sadly, some folks have this view that faith needs to be blind, and if you examine anything intellectually, you're probably in trouble, and you might end up a skeptic and just stay there in skepticism. But that wasn't Socrates' goal. And as I said, we don't look to him for the final answers, but he does give us some hints in terms of intellectual sobriety and tenacity, the examined life. So we have so much in Scripture about not speaking before we think and being patient. Love is patient and kind. And we need to apply that to the intellect also. We need to be patient and kind and tenacious in examining what the Scripture teaches, in looking at current affairs, and in trying to come up with a meaningful, consistent, and coherent worldview, which I think in the final analysis is Christianity.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll continue our conversation for a few more minutes. Dr. Doug Groothuis has done such a great service with not only this book, but many others, and I wanted to do this from little short kind of vignettes every Friday for a while, because in some respects, when we think philosophy, we maybe think we should change the channel. And when I say, well, wait a minute, we really do need these very short kind of summaries of these ideas. There are people that are very definitely using the ideas of Protagoras, even if they don't know who he is. Sadly, I'm afraid a lot of kids don't even know who Socrates is, but nevertheless, that is the case. And in this book, he also recommends some other books. Peter Kreft's been on the program with us, been years, but he's written books like Socrates Meets Jesus, Socrates Meets Descartes. And anyway, we're going to talk about the importance of examining a life and some of the controversy that came because he was willing to examine life and challenge the existing establishment. We'll come back with that right after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Sometimes the verse in Jeremiah 29:11 has been misapplied since it originally was directed at the Jews in the Old Testament. It says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." A number of years ago, Chuck Bentley with Crown Financial Ministries illustrated that if you look at the previous verses, we find a blueprint for 4 steps to end poverty. Step 1 can be found in verse 5 that admonishes the Jews to build a house and settle down, and to plant a garden and eat from your own garden. Chuck says that this teaches that we are to take responsibility for our own welfare. Step 2 in verse 6 says that we are to marry and have sons and daughters, and that we are to increase, not decrease. We should have a growing family. What a contrast this is to the falling birth rates in the richest countries of the world. Step 3 is found in verse 7 that says, "Seek the peace and prosperity into the city." Prosperity is dependent upon the peace in our local community. Chuck says that we are to build enterprises that will assist others in the achievement of their goals and objectives. And step 4 talks about the danger of false views and false theology. It can be found in verses 8 and 9 that warn, "Do not let the prophets and diviners among you deceive you." The problem with some attempts to alleviate poverty is that they fail to acknowledge the spiritual condition of the people. What we believe about God impacts our view of marriage, finance, children, education, government, and religion. Reducing and even ending poverty in our communities and the world will only be successful if we follow God's plan. Chuck Bentley provides a clear outline from God's Word of what we can do to end poverty. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you hear on Viewpoints by visiting pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continue your conversation today with Dr. Doug Groothuis. Again, if you would like to know more about this particular book, we have information about it on our website, which is pointofview.net. If you'd like to actually have him come and speak to your group, we have a link to his website. And I do believe some of us are going to be coming out of some of these lockdowns. There's going to be some real opportunities for you to have him come and speak to you. So I wanted you to know about that. But Doug, as we talk about Socrates, it sort of connects up to the conversation I know I'm going to have with my roundtable discussion. And that is sometimes when you ask difficult questions, when you challenge the religious political elite, there are consequences. And you point out that Socrates was the first philosophical martyr. And some people may not understand why such drastic means and measures were taken against an individual that was simply asking questions. Can you kind of give us some context for that?
Yes, well, because Socrates didn't hold to any established orthodoxy, he was more of a questioner. He would upset people who were very dogmatic in their views without having a lot of support for them. So eventually he was taken to trial, and he was accused of corrupting the youth of Athens, and that simply meant he had followers who liked to listen to him and be engaged by him. And he was also accused of going against the established religion of Athens. And he really didn't do that either. He simply asked a lot of questions about the nature of religion. He was probably a monotheist himself. It's hard to tell. But he is a philosophical martyr because he was given the opportunity to recant. And if he would recant, he would be banished from Athens. And he thought literally that was a fate worse than death.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
he drank the hemlock. So he's an inspiration to people to think things through to the bitter end and not bow to power against your own convictions.
You know, in your section there on examining our lives, you talk about the fact that maybe the statement's a bit of hyperbole, and you even quote from G.K. Chesterton in that regard. But so we're not saying that if a person has never taken a class in philosophy, never studied under Dr. Doug Groothuis, or been to Denver Seminary or something like that, you know, their life is worthless. But I think there is a sense in which if people were to ask some fundamental questions or try to answer in their quiet questions, maybe even in their own mind, even if not verbally, why am I here? What am I doing? What's the purpose in life? Those are important questions. And Socrates says, well, we discover that with logic. The difficulty is that if you accept that we are fallen, logic certainly gets you further down the road, but without revelation, I think you also run into some difficulties. And of course, obviously Socrates never met Jesus and never was around then. So put those together, because, you know, faith and reason are some things I know you teach about all the time in your seminary classes. And some people have trouble kind of figuring out how that all fits together.
Right. And how many minutes do I have to respond, Kirby?
I know. I'm asking
About
big
5?
questions on big issues.
Yeah, well, you can always come and study with me here at Denver Seminary, but Jesus never spoke against the significance of the intellect. He was concerned that people were prideful,
Yes.
and that their tradition had eclipsed the authority of Scripture, and that they were misinterpreting who he was as the Messiah. But someone like Socrates, who didn't have benefit of biblical revelation, because he was made in the image and likeness of God, and because all truth is God's truth, can encourage us to examine our own lives and to develop a worthwhile worldview. So we don't stop with Socrates, but I think a non-Christian can start with Socrates and say, well, are there good reasons to believe in God? Who was Jesus? If Jesus was who he said he was, how does that affect my life? And how does that affect the rest of the universe, and so on? So he gives us some very savvy advice about how to ask important questions and how to continue to do so and not be satisfied with with simplistic answers or non-answers or mere diversions, as Pascal warned against. Sometimes people simply capitulate. They give up on trying to find meaning, and they try to keep themselves from thinking about it through various activities, games, or outright sins, just to not ask those questions. And
Yes.
Socrates tells us you need to do it. Give it a good shot, at least. And you mentioned Peter Kraft. He has a book, Socrates Meets Jesus, and
Right.
he's developed a whole series of books over about 30, 40 years of Socrates meets everybody. You know, Socrates meets Sartre, Socrates meets Descartes, and he was able to do that because that Socratic method, that Socratic spirit, is helpful for finding knowledge, finding beliefs that are rationally justified, and we do that through dialogue. You know, open, honest, fair, rigorous dialogue. There's nothing wrong with that.
And again, if nothing else, that's kind of going to be a theme we'll be talking about today with some of our roundtable guests. But you also point out something else, and you just said that sort of in passing, that sometimes people don't want to do the hard work. You talk about the fact that a number of years ago you happened upon a commercial on MTV, and you said, "Please forgive me," but no, the commercial was a real good one, because you got this man, a young man, he's trying to read a book, and he's just frustrated and everything, and finally grabs the remote, turns on MTV, and then all of a sudden he's smiling. And I think that unfortunately, whether you use MTV or you call it social media or whatever it might be, there is a whole generation that says, I don't want to do the hard work of trying to think through some of these issues. I, as a Christian, just want to say I believe it, but I don't want to really work on apologetics and try to figure out how to make my case for that. And I don't want to think about these deep questions of life. And yet there is a value in doing it, but it does involve hard work. And so many people are willing to give up and simply figure out what's on YouTube today.
Right. There's a kind of spurious joy and stupefaction, I think, in our culture. And we should avoid that because, take it from me, an old philosopher. I've been trying to think hard and write about the most important things now for almost 50 years. And it's not just a matter of hard work and grimacing and frowning all the time, although that's part of it. But there's really great joy in discovering truth. And all truth is ultimately based in the living truth of Jesus Christ. So if you humbly seek truth and are open to God to reveal truth to you, and you're willing to, as Jesus said, deny yourself, take up your cross daily, and follow me, there's tremendous benefit and tremendous joy, and you bring about good not only for yourself but for other people as well. But this is a discipline, just like learning to play golf is a discipline, or learning how to be a good public speaker is a discipline, a good interviewer is a discipline, as you are, Kerby. It takes time and work. You don't get it on the cheap.
You don't.
But I certainly testify that it's worthwhile, and Socrates can be an inspiration for us in this. All the more Jesus, but certainly Socrates as kind of a prelude to Jesus, if you will.
Let me just mention that we do have a link to your website. Of course, we'll have you on next week, and I believe we'll be spending some time talking about Aristotle. But if people would like to contact you, again, I've been trying to promote the fact that you also go out and speak, and that is another great opportunity. If people wanted to study with Denver Seminary and you, that's something they can do. And I notice from time to time various things you've posted, and one of those is the Groothuis Reading Guide to Political and Cultural Discernment. And as I look down there, many of the people you cite, well, not Augustine because he's not alive, but whether it's J.P. Moreland, Os Guinness. Matter of fact, today we're going to be talking a lot about Rod Dreyer's been on the program with us twice, and Kelly Shackelford's been leading a lot of people through a Bible study on that, and a variety of others are on that list. And so I think if people are trying to make their sense out of what is happening right now, you recommend some kind of old books and some new books, some classics as well as some that maybe you had not heard of before, including some of your own, which include Truth Decay, Defending Christianity Against the Challenges of Postmodernism, and, of course, the debt of gratitude that you and I both owe to Francis Schaeffer. And even though we haven't interviewed him, we've done a number of interviews about him on this program. And so if you find yourself saying, okay, I'd like to know a little bit more, I'd like to think about one or two of these issues, I'd like to get out of the day-to-day back and forth and think about this from a biblical point of view, those are also available. And if you don't know how to spell Doug's name, good news is we have that link on the website. It's douggroothuis.com. And we also have a link to this book, Philosophy in 7 Sentences, a small introduction to a vast topic. And you can get it in paperback or Kindle. Since it's been out for a while, it's relatively inexpensive, and it's something we commend to you to do. So, Doug, thank you for joining us. Next week, I think we cover Aristotle, and I look forward to the opportunity.
We do. Thank you very much, Kerby.
We're going to take a break, and then in studio with it will be Dr. Merrill Matthews and Kelly Shackelford. We have a lot to cover, and we will do that right after these important messages.
Sometimes I think about seeds. You ever stop to consider that some seeds become entire trees and some trees grow up and produce fruit? Other seeds become flowers or vines that bring us vegetables or berries. And some trees don't have fruit, but they're just pretty, especially in some parts of the country when it comes to the fall colors. Yes, sometimes my mind goes off like that. And I also think about such things when it comes to the seeds that so many have planted in the quest to impact our nation through Point of View Radio. You may think that your gift is a small thing, but like a seed, it can grow to have an impact beyond your imagination. If you want to see beauty again in America, consider planting a seed today and making a difference by joining the Point of View Truth Team. Get the details today, right now, by visiting pointofview.net/team or call us at 1-800-347-5151. Plant a seed for a great future. Cultivate truth. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining us once again here, and we're going to get into our weekend edition. As you might imagine, we have in studio with us Dr. Merrill Matthews, resident scholar with the Institute for Policy Innovation, and maybe as a program note, I might just mention he's going to be the host on Thursday, sitting in this chair, so looking forward to that. I think Penna's going to be here on Tuesday, so I'm going to have a lighter week, but that's okay. It's partially because I'm speaking places. Kelly Shackelford with us as well, and Kelly knows what that's all about. You were in Washington, D.C. this week, and of course, CEO and Chief Counsel for First Liberty Institute. What was it like in Washington, D.C.? You say there aren't just a lot of people walking around.
No, it was like a ghost town. You couldn't get a cab ride, like where I was staying, which is somewhat near the White House. I had to walk like 8 blocks with my luggage. That's how many of the streets. And when I left the hotel, by then it was 10 blocks in any direction for me to get to a cab or a car or whatever. So it has been, and they've told people not to come for the inauguration. They've Airbnb has said they're canceling reservations. So it really is bizarre to see what they're doing. And look, I don't know what intel is out there, but all of my instincts are that this is massive overreach. We don't need to militarize, all of D.C. like some, foreign country is coming in. But that's basically what it's going to look like to everybody.
Well, and again, some people are reporting we have more military presence in Washington, D.C. than we have in all of Iraq and Afghanistan.
Yeah, I would have thought Kelly would have said it looks like a military camp.
Yeah, exactly right.
But and this is true of politicians, and I don't mean this either pro or con. But after Hurricane Katrina hit, and a number of governors were criticized for not responding quickly enough and decisively enough, every governor learned that message. And now if we just get a rainstorm coming in, they want to make sure they've got the troops ready, the whatever they need. Red Cross is on stand. I mean, they sort of want to be over prepared for this, and it's part of the pendulum swing that goes with politics. And after what happened Wednesday of last week, nobody's going to want to let something bad happen again. They want to be over prepared.
And again, yesterday we posted this piece by John Solomon pointing out that the FBI did say earlier this week that they had information that some participants were planning a war on the Capitol, including killing officers, even distributing maps of the complex. And you've had even James Clyburn, who's a Democrat, and some others saying, it's pretty hard to find my office, and they found it within minutes. So somebody obviously knew where they were going. So there's some reasons to be concerned. So we want to cover some of that in the National Hour, but I just thought for just a few minutes, since we do have a very significant number of people living in the state of Texas who are watching or listening to this program, it might be good just to talk about a few things. And what is so interesting is earlier this week, the Attorney General Ken Paxton issued a civil investigative demand to Google, Facebook, Twitter, Amazon Web Services, and Apple. Said for years the big tech companies have silenced voices in the social media sphere and shut down competing companies and platforms. It has grown worse in recent months. And so he wants some investigation. And, of course, we also have the Texas legislature that is convened. So later in the National Hour, we're going to talk about that. But even here in the state of Texas, some of the repercussions of what has taken place in the last week since we've had many of you on the program are starting to unfold.
Yeah, there's going to be this is going to happen across the country, but Texas has already started. I don't know how many. I think somebody told me 40 or 50 or might even be more than that. Bills already been filed on controlling the governor not having total control during an alleged emergency.
There we go.
They're going to have to deal with that. I mean, one of the things that I think will be dealt with not only in Texas but all over the country is this idea of protecting churches from the government thinking it can, control the churches. So I think you'll see a number of bills saying that, look, if you want to give advice, you can give advice, but you have no right to step inside a church and tell them, when they can exist and when they can't. So I think you're going to see those. There's going to be a lot of, attempts to try to get some of these tech companies under control. So, I think it's going to be of course, the biggest of all probably is in a number of these states. I mean, I really think everywhere there will be really focused attempts on voter integrity and putting in new laws to make sure that things are done where not only it's something that is right and you don't have any voter fraud of any sort or irregularities, but also so people can know and have confidence in what's going on. So things like ballot harvesting and just how you do absentee ballots, or in the states that allow mail ballots. I think there's going to be all kinds of things going on in the legislatures across the country. But Texas is already going to, those bills have already been filed, pre-filed as well. So it's going to be a very interesting session.
One good piece of news is we learned that the state's going to have a little more money than it thought it was going to have.
Yeah, we did talk about that earlier. Go ahead.
And the concern had been since the pandemic, people not buying things, people not working. Is that going to hurt state taxes? And not driving because the state gets money off the gas tax and so forth. So there had been real concerns both with the added expenses of the state and with the declining revenue of the state that was going to end up being a problem. And it certainly will be for some states, and it'll be a struggle, I think, for our legislators as well. But at least we find out that they're going to have more money than they thought they were going to have.
I thought Kelly was talking about this a minute ago. There's at least 6 bills filed by Democrats to expand absentee balloting. And then there's some Republican bills I've identified here that are actually wanting to restrict a mail-in ballot application to any voter that actually meets the statutory requirements. So if you think that's happening in Texas, of course, it's happening all over the country. The emergency powers, there are all sorts of bills related to that. And if that's not enough, it's back to taxes, property taxes, and, oh, yes, redistricting. California is losing a congressional representative. Texas loses 1 or 2, depending on what one.
Gains, you mean?
No, Texas gains 3, I'm sorry.
Yes.
New York loses 1 or 2, depending on whether you look at April or July. If you look at July, they lose 2.
I vote for 2.
But anyway, back to the point I was going to make. Yes, Texas, I jumped ahead. Texas is picking up 3. Mm-hmm. Florida's picking up 2, and most of the states, and I'd love to get your comments about that, are pretty much red states, although Oregon is the outlier. Mm-hmm. And then on those states that are losing, most of them are blue states, although West Virginia is one of those. So basically, you see people sort of moving generally from blue states to red states.
Well, and then yet at the same time, you have the things that make people just get very frustrated. For instance, in Texas, you have a new speaker come in, and they're fighting over the rules. And one of the things that a lot of the conservatives in the Republican Party complained about is, why do you continually come in and put Democrats in charge of over half these committees? Mm-hmm. And then they shut down everything that people want. And they tried to put some rules in where the Republicans could do differently. But again, they were outvoted. So the Republicans have control, and they voted to have the Democrats have half of the chairmanships and therefore control half of the committees. So, you're probably going to have a lot of business as usual and some people being frustrated by what goes on in the Texas legislature.
I think the lieutenant governor, though, is moving to change one thing in the Senate so that it's not 19 votes,
but
18 votes now.
Yes.
And so that allows things to move forward without that one extra vote.
It's really odd because it used to be always in Texas that the House was the more conservative because it's that every 2 years, so they have to be real responsive to the people of Texas, which is a more conservative state. The Senate was the one that was the slower, the little more moderate and all that. And then the last few years, it's totally flipped. I mean, you've got Dan Patrick, who is a very conservative Republican, leading the Senate, and you've got a conservative Senate, and they're the ones kind of leading the way on the conservative bills, whereas the House has been the disappointment. So it's kind of been backwards a little bit.
In Washington, tax spending measures are supposed to start in the House. Mm-hmm. They don't always do that. They have ways to get around that. Is that true in Texas as well, or do you know?
I think that is true. I think the spending does start in the House. But the way it works, I mean, you can just attach things onto other things. And, I mean, there's so many little shell games that are played, especially at the last minute.
Politicians playing shell games.
Little points of order that kill bills. And all of a sudden, bills just are recreated in 24 hours, off of something else. So those who have been around usually know the way to work. And the way to kill a bill in the House is the calendars committee.
Say the calendars committee.
So you wouldn't
I was
think
gonna bring that up.
That would be how they'd be like, what? Yeah. They're just setting the timing on things? No. That's where some things never time up and get a vote.
I still remember when Arlene Wogemuth, as a state representative, had the Memorial Day Massacre, they called it, and she killed a whole bunch of bills.
Yes, well, it is possible. Much easier to kill a bill than to pass a bill, which I think is good.
Good news.
But if nothing else, let's take a break. This we're talking about, though, when we come back from the break, I just want to get your thoughts, because there's some people that are saying taxpayer-funded lobbying is an issue, and it's a little complex, so I want to wait till after the break to explain what that is, but I think that's going to be a big issue in this session. Then we'll move on to some other topics right after these important messages.
The jarring events of the past year, and especially of recent weeks, have further divided an already divided nation and rocked the sensibilities even of Bible-believing Christians. In 2021, we're certainly not out of the woods. In fact, going forward, things may get difficult for Christians. As the pandemic rose, some churches took financial hits. Others found it difficult to adapt technologically. All churches had to make changes, but wise pastors reassured their congregations that the gospel does not change just because there's a pandemic, or riots in cities, or an election, or threats to our constitutional republic. This is the right message for all Christian organizations. Rich Bott, chairman and CEO of the Bott Radio Network, put out a letter stating that his organization will do what it has always done: proclaim the truth of God's Word. Mr. Bott says the network's format does not depend on who is in the White House or whatever political winds are blowing. That's important because when you add the dramatic politics of the past couple of months to the rest of 2020, there's a certain weariness that's set in among Christians. A couple of veterans of the football world described this in a Wall Street Journal op-ed entitled "A Call for Christian Revival in 2021. Former player and coach and Pro Football Hall of Fame member Tony Dungy and Benjamin Watson, director of NFL programs for Pro Athletes Outreach, conclude that religious leaders are exhausted. They point out that too many churches are too reluctant to point to biblical truth out of fear of criticism from secular culture. But Christians need leaders who will not compromise truth. This is especially true for leaders who run Christian media outlets. As Americans' trust in media is diminished, Christian media becomes more crucial than ever. Kerby Anderson and the staff here at Point of View remain committed to providing wise, biblically based and truthful analysis of cultural trends and the events swirling around us. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, and then at the National Hour, we're going to be talking about, first of all, are those individuals that raise questions about the election guilty of sedition? Of course, I think you know what the answer is there. The whole issue of canceling conservatism. And Victor Davis Hanson, as usual, has a very good piece on the electronic octopus. If you remember back in the Trustbuster days, and of course, again, I got two historians sitting with me, so they remember, but if you don't, when it came time time to think about whether or not there was a sort of a vertical monopoly. There was a desire to break up that so-called octopus then. But let's stay on Texas for another few minutes, because the issue I raised is the taxpayer-funded lobbying ban. I think you can give partial blame or credit to Kelly Shackelford, if I remember right, because the concern, if I can express it, is that you are paying for, with your tax dollars, individuals, let's just say like in the city of Dallas or a variety of other places, to then use your tax dollars to go down and argue for what you may disagree with. In other words, bigger government. And so many people have felt that that is unfair. There was a Republican-led amendment that would try to exempt most of the state, but that didn't go anywhere. But I think this is going to be a big issue this time. What's your thoughts?
It's a huge issue. What'll be interesting, too, we haven't talked about this, though. The Republican Party, which controls the House, the Senate, the governorship, they had a meeting. And at that meeting, they said, here are the issues that are our top legislative issues. The question is, will the elected officials follow and deal with those issues? It'll be interesting. Well, this is one of them. And it's an important one because it's really morally wrong for the government to take your tax money and then use that to pay for lobbyists who go down and say they want more tax money. It's a horrible idea. It's exactly what happens. And it is the ultimate understanding of why we have problems in government, because you can see how this just always is continually going to go in one direction. You can't leave your job and go down to Austin, and be paid to go down to Austin to lobby on the things you care about, or like maybe even lowering your taxes. And the idea that they would use your tax money and do that, and again, they do it in different ways. Sometimes they'll send people directly. Sometimes what they do is, like, take a school board. They will, the school board members will become member of a private group called the Texas Association of School Boards. Well, how do they pay for that? Well, they pay for it from the tax money, but now there's this private group that has all this money and that goes down and lobbies and does all this thing. And so, again, I think this is one of those no-brainer. If you put this to a vote of the people of Texas,
don't you know, they
would say, you're doing what? Now, if people want to do this on their own time, on their time off, on their whatever, okay. But this really puts citizens at a disadvantage, and it should be something that should not happen.
Education lobby is one of those. Mention a few others.
Yeah, well, I tell you,
education is a big one, I think, isn't it?
It's a huge one. I mean, I first became aware of this in a really specific way when school choice was really being argued about in Texas. Probably, I'm thinking this might be 25. I'm aging myself, pinning myself here. I think it might have been 25 years ago when I remember being in the Texas legislature, having a meeting with 5 or 6 nonprofit leaders who were very committed to the issue, TPPF and some of the other groups. And we had a meeting, and then I remember them listing the number of people who were there who were government lobbyists. It was like 100. So, you got school districts and education associations, all these lobbyists there at taxpayer money versus, a handful of citizens who could afford to come down and do on the other side. And you were like, well, this is, and so I mentioned this to some people who were donors to these type of groups, and they're very successful business people, and they realized, oh my gosh. And so that was part of the reason they started some groups like Empower Texans and others, is because they realized this is how can we win if we're always feeding the enemy, gasoline? I mean, it doesn't make a lot of sense. So if you're trying to get control of the size of government, then you can't feed the government's lobbyists to lobby against you every time you do it.
One of the places where we're pretty clear on this is nonprofit organizations. So my Institute for Policy Innovation is a nonprofit, 501c3. So is Point of View, I believe. And so people can give us donations, but they get a tax deduction for giving us a donation. That's plug. They get a tax deduction. But if we were lobbying out there, if we were saying you have to vote for this legislation, you can't vote for this politician and so forth. If we were doing that, we would lose that, because the rationale is we don't want people's tax dollars subsidizing us lobbying for or against politicians or legislation. And the same sort of principle applies here.
Yeah. Now, I will say, just so people know, when it comes to nonprofits, they can do so up to 10% of their resources. So, I mean, which makes sense, right? If you're a group and your whole focus is to do, you name it, the idea that you would go down and want to protect against something that might hurt your ability to do that makes sense. So, but it's a small amount.
And my understanding is that's sort of a fail-safe. So if I end up being caught doing that and it was small, they say, okay, we're not going to hold you accountable there. So it gives me a little bit of wiggle room. But the principle is we're not supposed to be lobbying for candidates or legislation because they don't want tax-free dollars going to support that.
And I was going to come to you because, one of the things I love so much about IPI, Institute for Policy Innovation, is that you do a fair amount of critique of pieces of legislation and about various policies and things like that. And people would say, well, you're lobbying. No, I'm trying to look at this in an objective way.
It's education versus lobbying.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And yet some people don't.
There can be a fine line there sometimes.
And as we get into the national hour, there's just a total blurring of almost everything right now. The people that were at the rally, they were the rioters.
Especially common sense.
Yes, common sense. So all of that. But just real quickly before we run out of time, property tax, another one. You have what's called SB2, which says, if you raise property taxes too much, you have to submit it to the voters. What a concept. But they got enough if you will, loopholes because of the lobbyists.
That's right.
That's a good example of where this taxpayer-funded lobbying ban came into effect, right?
Absolutely. I mean, we're going to run into this coming up soon. I mean, how many people, are going to be ready to pay higher taxes after the government told them they couldn't work for the last, 6 months? So this is a big deal. And this is one of those things where, of course, people would want, if they're going to raise taxes, would want the ability for them to have to be a part of that decision. But the reason for so long that could not get through was because they had all these government lobbyists there lobbying against you while you were at work. And again, this affects so many issues.
Yes, it does.
It's how the left tends to work. They use taxpayer dollars to push their thing, whereas on the conservative side, they don't use taxpayer dollars. They don't want taxpayer dollars. And so this is a key way to sort of dry up, the misuse of taxpayer funds for leftist purposes that are often against biblical principles.
Well, again, an attempt to try to make the playing field level. So when we come back from the break, I want to get everybody's comment about impeachment. Have we now just trivialized it? I mean, some people used to say that impeachment was as serious almost as declaring war, and now you've impeached the same president 2 years in a row. And what does that mean? Half of the impeachments have gone to one individual. What about that? And then what about some of the lack of common sense, as Kelly put it, in terms of the way media has covered some of this? The pushback from major media and big tech. I haven't really talked about that with you guys. It's amazing all this has happened in 1 week. So we'll have a lot to talk about in the next 2 hours, and we'll be back with that right after these important messages.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is our weekend edition, and I know many of you have been looking forward to this because we are going to get into all sorts of issues that have unfolded within just the last week. As we signed off on Friday, we suspected there might be some action from social media, but had no idea all that was going to take place there. We knew there was going to be an impeachment, and the impeachment vote has taken place, but now will that go to the Senate? Should it go to the Senate? Can you remove a person from office who has already left office? There are some really important questions there. If you look at our articles here, we have one on guilty of sedition. As I've said before, there are people right now using words the way my 2-year-old granddaughter used to use a spoon, with lots of enthusiasm but very little precision. And then we are going to get into the whole question of what to do about some of the social media censorship. Good piece by Victor Davis Hanson on the electronic octopus. Also one on how to resist big tech. As we're going around the table, I know some have decided to get off some of their social media. And before it's all through, had to put up at least one Dr. Merrill Matthews piece. Is Pago still a thing? I didn't know it was. And so we'll have some fun with that one as well. Dr. Merrill Matthews with us, of course, resident scholar with the Institute for Policy Innovation, and of course, Kelly Shackelford, who's the CEO and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. First of all, your thoughts about impeachment. It seems to me that we have changed it from being a solemn function to something that's now happened 2 times in 2 years.
Yeah, what the Democrats have done over the past 4 years with impeachment, I think, has been very damaging to our country. I think people have probably seen there's a Republican already they're planning to file impeachment against Biden. This is what they've wrought. Impeachment was not supposed to be a partisan tool. It's kind of like the death penalty of politicians, and you bring it out for the sake of the country only when there is something that really is a high crime or misdemeanor. The Democrats have failed miserably, and they've ruined this for the country. The other thing I would say before we get into the specifics of impeachment is Joe Biden has absolutely failed as a president-elect. He was given, I think, a golden opportunity that would have been very beneficial to him. When this came, he could have said, you know what? I've said I want unity, and I think it's time we stop this. The president is leaving in 9 days, 10 days, whatever at the time. He could have shown some class, and I think he would have gotten a lot of support from people who didn't vote for him. I think that's a really important thing for presidents to do. He didn't do that. He's shown a lack of leadership here. He either doesn't mean what he says about unity, or he's really messed it up. And he was given, because of a horrible situation, he was given a real opportunity to really heal. And so I think he's failed as a president-elect. This is the one thing he could have done already, and he has not done it. His party has acted really without control, and he didn't do anything about it. And so far, he hasn't been a very good leader, either for his party or the country. And I think that's a shame, because I think he had an opportunity to really heal and bring people together.
You know, we have some precedent for this. At the end of the Civil War, The Republicans who ran the Congress then wanted to punish the South, and Abraham Lincoln said, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to move forward. Of course, he's assassinated, and then Andrew Johnson comes in, and then it becomes a mess. But you also have Gerald Ford when he comes in after Richard Nixon. He pardons Nixon. He gets a lot of criticism for that. Ted Kennedy criticized him, came up later on and said, I think that was actually the right move because it tried to help heal the country and so forth. So you do have examples of people who said, we're going to try to heal this and move on, and it's worked well to some extent, but it's hard to do it, and Joe Biden didn't.
I, as a matter of fact, have a commentary coming out next week on the pardon power and all of that, which we'll get to later. But, okay, the bigger question, and since we have a lawyer here and certainly a constitutional scholar with the two of you, the question has been, okay, the vote on impeachment has taken place. Then, of course, we know the history. It goes to the Senate, requires the Chief Justice of the United States to convene that. But you've had people like, even on the Democratic side, James Clyburn, who served in that Congress longer than almost anyone else from South Carolina, a Democrat, who said, if we do this, can we at least postpone it 100 days and at least give Joe Biden an opportunity to move his legislative agenda and also confirm some of these individuals into his cabinet, which have to happen through the Senate? So can you remove a person from office, impeach and remove a person from office who's already left office?
By the way, that discussion right there that you just went through shows that this is not a serious impeachment. The whole point of impeachment is removal, and the idea that we have to remove the president immediately because he's a danger doesn't quite work when you say, well, let's wait 100 days until let Biden get. I mean, you can see the politics of this immediately, and that it's not a serious impeachment. As to the constitutional question, it has never been answered, but I think it's pretty clear. I mean, if I was guessing, and if you were to talk to not partisans, but if you were to talk to 80% of constitutional, people who look at the Constitution, who understand the Constitution, I think they would say you can't use impeachment for somebody who's not in office. Why? Number one, it specifically says it has to be the president or a civil officer.
Right.
Okay? It's not, it is a person who is in office. Number two, it says removal. Again, it's talking about removing somebody who is a civil officer, like the president, like the vice president. And so it's just not applicable to people outside of office. There have been some who have made the argument that, it should be able to be used even afterward for somebody because the other possible punishment is disqualification. That, I think, is more clearly, when you look at it, an addition to the removal. And I don't think it's a separate grounds. You can disqualify people in other ways from serving. That's not really what they're after. They're after removal. The one situation that is a little different, and not the founders, but as some impeachments occurred that dealt with this issue, they said, well, you can't allow somebody to the day before the decision in the Senate to say, I resign, and then you can't impeach them. I think that's a very unique circumstance, but in that case, I think there'd be some interesting arguments because I see the merit to that argument. But I think, impeaching somebody who's already out of office is not consistent with what the Constitution is saying. I also think, by the way, even if he were in office for the next 4 years, I think the ground of impeachment is really vacuous. I mean, it's so weak, it's almost a joke. This is the problem with what they've been doing with these impeachments. It needs to be serious. This is not, evidence-wise and as far as the legal basis.
We need to take a break. When we come back, though, I want to go around the round table because you sort of alluded to that. The article of impeachment is incitement when some of that actually preceded the speech. So I'd like to get some thoughts about that, and we'll be back right after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Sometimes the verse in Jeremiah 29:11 has been misapplied since it originally was directed at the Jews in the Old Testament. It says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." A number of years ago, Chuck Bentley with Crown Financial Ministries illustrated that if you look at the previous verses, we find a blueprint for 4 steps to end poverty. Step 1 can be found in verse 5 that admonishes the Jews to build a house and settle down, and to plant a garden and eat from your own garden. Chuck says that this teaches that we are to take responsibility for our own welfare. Step 2 in verse 6 says that we are to marry and have sons and daughters, and that we are to increase, not decrease. We should have a growing family. What a contrast this is to the falling birth rates in the richest countries of the world. Step 3 is found in verse 7 that says, "Seek the peace and prosperity into the city." Prosperity is dependent upon the peace in our local community. Chuck says that we are to build enterprises that will assist others in the achievement of their goals and objectives. And Step 4 talks about the danger of false views and false theology. It can be found in verses 8 and 9 that warn, "Do not let the prophets and diviners among you deceive you." The problem with some attempts to alleviate poverty is that they fail to acknowledge the spiritual condition of the people. What we believe about God impacts our view of marriage, finance, children, education, government, and religion. Reducing and even ending poverty in our communities and the world will only be successful if we follow God's plan. Chuck Bentley provides a clear outline from God's Word of what we can do to end poverty. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you hear on Viewpoints by visiting pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, at the moment talking about impeachment, but very quickly we're going to move on, I would suspect, into the whole issue of social media. But again, I've got a Constitution in front of me here, and Article 1, Section 3 certainly seems to indicate, Dr. Merrill Matthews, that it talks about that impeachment should actually be impeachment and removal from office. Then there's a comma, and then it does talk about disqualification. So if indeed that is the case, I'm just kind of a simple-minded individual. How do you remove somebody who's already left office? Any thoughts?
Well, I think Kelly's right that Democrats have vastly cheapened the notion of impeachment, because and by doing it so quickly, it just doesn't look like a serious deal. Even though the charges that are being made are serious, they're moving through it in such a quick way, and I think it's absolutely important from Biden's standpoint that he has the Senate and the House focused on his priorities. I'm surprised he doesn't sort of push back on this a little bit to say, I want them doing. You know, back when Barack Obama was going to do Obamacare, Green New Deal, his sort of version of the Green New Deal and other things, the question was raised was, aren't you giving the legislative Congress too much to work on? He said, oh, they can work on a bunch of issues at the same time. Well, it turns out they have a lot of trouble working on one issue
yes, they do.
at the time. So we'll see what happens. My guess is that a lot of people would like this to just sort of go away and say, let's focus on the on getting Biden's agenda passed and work through Congress and so forth, and maybe we just won't remember it here, or we'll come back to it later and we'll just say, oh, it's just so long we won't do it. But I don't know where they'll go with this.
What about the charge? Because we were just talking about the charges. Really, there's just one charge, and that is incitement to insurrection. And now we're hearing it was an Antifa insurrection. It was a Christian insurrection. I get a little tired of all these labels. But Kelly, you've done kind of a timeline here to help us out to figure out what happened at the Capitol and when the president was speaking. Can you help us with that?
Yeah, well, it's just the idea that that the president incited an insurrection by what he said at the event is just a lie. I mean, it's just factually a lie. It's a lie because, number one, the president was speaking about a 45-minute walk from the Capitol. And the insurrection, the invasion of the Capitol started at 12:40. His speech went until 1:10. So the people couldn't get to the Capitol until about 2 o'clock if they heard his speech. So it's, everybody's being given the impression that people heard his speech and they went to the Capitol. That's not what happened. Additionally, what did he say? He specifically said, I want you to go there and cheer on and he's the representatives, and he said peaceably. He specifically said peaceably. So it's just false. The other problem is we have a definition for incitement and what the standard is, because in this country we value speech, and especially at the zenith of all speech is political speech that we want to protect. And so there have been a lot of lawsuits where, Black Lives Matter leader was sued because some police officer got hurt and they said, hey, you agitated the crowd, and then the police officer got hurt, and guess what the court said? That's not enough. It's not enough to give a rally where people get excited. Did you say go attack the Capitol? Did you say, these are high standards, or else every political person would go to jail, because all it would take is you write something in your column if you're listening, or you send out a Twitter and just say, I'm so mad, blah, 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 and then somebody does something. That is not something that you can punish people for, or else free speech is over and political speech is over. So none of this, it not only doesn't meet the requirement of incitement, it's not even in the universe of meeting it. It's just silly. So look, you might say, I think the president made a lot of mistakes. I think that what he did was bad. I think, that's not what we're talking about with impeachment. And so I think everybody is repudiating the people who did this. It's unclear at this point how much planning. It seems like, as the FBI stuff is coming out, this is not like something that just happened. It was something that was planned. There are maybe, maps and schematics and all kinds of things. Pipe bombs. And by the way, the pipe bombs were at the RNC. In other words, they were trying to blow up the Republican Party. So anyway, a lot of the imaging that's been given to people has been false. Everybody agrees that whoever these people are that did this, they need to be punished to the full extent of the law. But this is the danger. The real danger is when people get out of control. And I'm not talking about the rioters now. When other people are so hateful of somebody or something, they can do things that set a precedent that are very dangerous. And that's what we're watching for here. And we've got to be very careful, because if you don't like what the president said and therefore you want a semi-criminal procedure against him, then are you ready for it to come against you because you say something that is not inciting anybody, but somebody reacts and then they want to blame you? And this is sort of unfortunately, there's two sets of people behind this. There's people who just are angry and they're not thinking. And then there are people who want to take advantage of a crisis, and they want to try to smear the 75 million people that voted for the president because they don't like the president. and they're willing to intentionally do it in a way that is damaging to the country.
I'm going to take a bit of a different approach in that my sense is that the issue of incitement depends upon whether or not you think the president lost the election, knew he lost the election, and continued pressing a narrative along with his aides that we won this, we won it by a big majority, it's been stolen and so forth. Or if you think that was perfect, I mean, that maybe he did think that and so forth, and so they were trying to find out what was going on. My sense is, as I listen to people, those who feel like the president lost, he knew he lost, or at least he should have known he lost, and he kept moving this forward with the argument because the people are rallying there because they feel like the election was stolen. This is stop the steal. And so if you're showing up there for that, and you have some people who are more aggressive, if you've pressed that notion and you knew it was wrong, then is incitement a valid claim? And I go back, I mentioned this last Friday that the day after the riot at the Capitol, Politico released a interview with Elisa Farah, who was the president's internal pollster for the campaign. And she says in that, and people can go look at it, it's online, just go to Politico and you can find it. But she says, we knew that this was an uphill battle, especially in Pennsylvania and Arizona. We thought we were going to have trouble in those states. She said we knew North Carolina was a squeaker. They won that. She said the only thing that actually took us by surprise based on our internal polling was Georgia. We thought we would win Georgia. And so she said she was going to go on the day after the election, says, looks like we lost, but we did a lot of good things with this. And I was told by the campaign to stand down because that was not the message. And she says in there, even in the White House, everybody knew what the internal polls were and what the elections were, but they decided to go forward with a different message. Now, I don't know if she's telling the truth. I don't have any reason to doubt it, but she decided to resign in December because of that. If that's the case, it puts a bit more of a shadow on it in my mind if they know this is false and they're moving forward with it. I don't know, but that's what she's alleging. And so if you're doing that, then you give Democrats a little bit of fodder in saying you knew you lost and you pushed this agenda and you created this sort of atmosphere for this to happen.
Which is why they're picking on Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley.
Right.
And, of course, the first article we have here is the back and forth between Congressman Brian Mast and Jake Tapper, because Jake Tapper said you committed sedition. I don't know how you voted to commit sedition, but nevertheless, it just gets us into that.
Look, I just think this whole approach doesn't work because it's hypocritical. The Democrats objected to the election results in 2001. They objected to the election results in 2005. They objected to the election results in 2017. So do all those people who objected, do they need to all be thrown out of office? Somehow it was okay. And now Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley and them, who, by the way, they didn't even stand up and say, we want you to throw out the election results. They said, we need to look into this because this was really problematic. There were, we need to form, and Ted Cruz's deal, it was we need to form a commission to look at this and see what's happening. And so it's just bizarre how it was okay for all these years until just recently to follow that Electoral Count Act and to do proper objections.
Never let a crisis go to waste. We'll come back and talk more about that. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, at Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, that number is 1-800-351-1212. First article we've posted is one that was talking about the media's cynical sedition smear. And words are being thrown around like incitement and insurrection and sedition. I see some callers want to talk about the speech by the president, and I will be the first to say that certainly there were some things that most of us around the table would not have said. We know that. But the word sedition and words like insurrection and claiming certain things are a Christian insurrection, these are all starting to surface, and I think there's a need for our listeners to have some level of discernment. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, there's a lot of things in what you just said, but I mean, words have meanings, and this is Marxism. What Marxism does is they redefine words, right? We've been seeing this for years now, of trying to redefine words so that they don't have meaning. And it's very dangerous. We need to be very clear about what words mean. We do not need to say things irresponsibly. Again, I understand there are a lot of people that not only don't like the president, they hate the president. While that's not appropriate for Christians, it's out there. But that doesn't mean that, they're just looking to fit him into certain crimes or certain things, and so they're willing to redefine the words. But the problem with these kind of approach is when you redefine the words, they can be used that way against you, and it's very dangerous to do that. No, example, we didn't talk about this. I know Merrill mentioned the idea of how fast things went in the House on impeachment. Due process. It's basic. When you try somebody, they get due process. And the idea that you're going to run the president through a 3-day trial where there really is no trial, where there's no hearing, where he has no representation, where nobody knows what the evidence really is. I mean, they're still trying to figure out, who these people are and what they did, and is there any connection to the president, which there doesn't seem to be, outside of that. Some of these people were obviously pro President Trump. That's not how you have an impeachment trial. And you don't do it that way. That's not the way we've ever done it. Well, guess what? If the president doesn't get due process, do you think you get due process? I mean, it's really dangerous. You got to be very careful about the standards we're putting in place, because if they'll do it to the most powerful people, this is kind of like Twitter deplatforming. Do you think they'll do it to you? I know a number of people who are not able to go on Twitter now. They did this to Franklin Graham. Okay, so we have to be careful about the society we're creating. Look past Trump and look at the specifics of whatever factual situation, whatever the definition of what you're looking at is, because there are people trying to change our society by redefining words and changing protections and liberties and things that really are what America is all about.
Don't really have anything to add.
Well, the only other thing I was going to add is that you can look at the president, and then I'll take some phone calls. We have a situation in which you had a musician, a musical artist that went to the rally and then was removed from his record label. I know you know the lawyer that actually argued the case about elections in Georgia that was removed from her law firm.
After 20 years as a lawyer there.
We can go down the long list, but it's becoming where crime, with air quotes, okay, I don't mean it's an actual crime, but the crime is if you're on the wrong side of what a particular powerful group thinks, then you can lose your livelihood.
Yeah.
And that's becoming more and more obvious as we begin to see how this unfolds, right?
It's totalitarianism. Okay, it's now people might say, well, it's not really the government. It doesn't really matter who's doing it. It's totalitarianism. It's this is what you believe, or we will destroy you. Now, in totalitarian countries, it might mean you'd be in a gulag, right, and being tortured. But it also might mean you don't get that job. We're seeing that right now, right? It might mean there's certain career paths you're not allowed to go in. It might mean your kids can't go into this school. It might mean you can't travel. We're hearing about that right now, too, right? I mean, all the kind of stuff that they tell you from Poland and Soviet Union and everything else, we're seeing these things being implemented, sometimes with the government's wink, sometimes just through corporations that are more powerful than the government, to be honest. So that's what this is about. And, we've got to, the fever pitch of people hating people on the other side is what the Christian community can come in and say that's wrong. We can disagree and still love one another. And but if you lose that, this is where you go, where no, I now have power, so my opponents will be silenced and punished. And anybody who's watching the punishing right now who is not repulsed by it, you need to check your heart, because the problem is with you. This is not how we treat people in the United States. We've never done this to people before, and it's becoming more and more cancel culture, I think, is way too kind of a word. It's assassination culture. It's destroying people, 17, 18-year-olds, because of something they did on YouTube, 5 years ago, and saying now you can't go to that university. You can't. I mean, it's really extreme stuff, and we've got to get on top of it. You're holding the book by Rod Dreher. I think the main thing is we've got to speak out against it. We've got to say it's wrong. We've got to stand up and say this is not acceptable. So, it's kind of the old Bonhoeffer thing. Silence in the face of evil is sin. We've got to speak up when we see these things happening, because if not, we'll lose our country.
Again, if you're watching, I'm just holding up the book by Rod Dreher. And, of course, you've been doing a book study, which we've been talking about there. Rod was on with us in October, on with us again in January. And his theory is, and I certainly agree with it, that this is not hard totalitarianism like you had from Communist Soviet Union or Nazi Germany. He calls it soft totalitarianism, but it's not that soft. But what he's meaning is private sector. We're talking about individuals who are saying, well, I can deplatform you from Twitter. I can remove you from the Amazon Web Services. I can no longer represent you in a court of law, or you cannot be in this law firm, or you cannot be with this record company, or as you go down the long list, we've tried to give those. One that I showed you the other day is where a principal just was trying to educate the kids about the fact that there is censorship in social media, and then he was put on leave because even talking about the possibility there might be some censorship in social media is enough for you to possibly lose your job. And you say these things sometimes. You can't make this stuff up, but that's exactly what we find ourselves in.
Well, I will toss out, remember Colin Kaepernick, who decided to protest while he was working, and he ends up losing his job, and he's not able to find another one. And I listened to the left, especially some of the people on NPR, who just felt like this was absolutely inappropriate. And I never thought it was inappropriate. I thought, if I'm a private sector owner of a football team, do I want one of my players coming out protesting in one of these things when I'm trying to keep this from being political? And so I generally supported the NFL teams that did not hire him, and people thought that was just a ban on it. So there have been times when we've seen political protests that we said, we understand why this private sector company is separating itself from them. And at least going back to the situation here, I still go back to the notion, if you think this was something that was being pushed and was not true, then you're more likely to want to push back against them than if you thought it's reasonable, that may have happened, and so forth and so on. And so a lot of this depends upon how you see what you think was happening over the last 2 months.
Yeah, and I do think there's a difference, like Buddy was mentioning, there's a difference between sort of publicly doing something that might harm your company's business and sort of making everything political. Like, I mean, a lot of what we're seeing today is somebody found out that somebody was at a rally and therefore they want the company to fire them when they never went public or did anything, that's what's really dangerous, I think, is we're really politicizing everything. And I think most Americans, I wish we do some polls on this. Most Americans probably are tired of all this, right? I'd rather watch a football game and not have to listen to what somebody has to say about politics. And the same with corporations. Why don't corporations try to make money? Which is what they're supposed to do. And just, why don't we leave that to I think people would like to be able to avoid politics for at least 5 minutes in the day.
Could we please?
If a movement starts, I think it'll catch on pretty quickly on that.
I think so. Okay, some of you would like to join the conversation. Let's give you that opportunity. 1-800-351-1212. Might also mention that even in this piece by Michael Barone, that is the second article, he reminds us that even if you don't like speech, even if you think it's, quote, hate speech, there are many long-standing Supreme Court precedents that still say that is protected. And yet, if I don't like it, we're going to throw you off the platform. So we'll come back and talk about those issues right after this.
The jarring events of the past year, and especially of recent weeks, have further divided an already divided nation and rocked the sensibilities even of Bible-believing Christians. In 2021, we're certainly not out of the woods. In fact, going forward, things may get difficult for Christians. As the pandemic rose, some churches took financial hits. Others found it difficult to adapt technologically. All churches had to make changes, but wise pastors reassured their congregations that the gospel does not change just because there's a pandemic, or riots in cities, or an election, or threats to our constitutional republic. This is the right message for all Christian organizations. Rich Bott, chairman and CEO of the Bott Radio Network, put out a letter stating that his organization will do what it has always done, proclaim the truth of God's Word. Mr. Bott says the network's format does not depend on who is in the White House or whatever political winds are blowing. That's important because when you add the dramatic politics of the past couple of months to the rest of 2020, there's a certain weariness that's set in among Christians. A couple of veterans of the football world described this in a Wall Street Journal op-ed entitled, "A Call for Christian Revival in 2021. Former player and coach and Pro Football Hall of Fame member Tony Dungy and Benjamin Watson, director of NFL programs for Pro Athletes Outreach, conclude that religious leaders are exhausted. They point out that too many churches are too reluctant to point to biblical truth out of fear of criticism from secular culture. But Christians need leaders who will not compromise truth. This is especially true for leaders who run Christian media outlets. As Americans' trust in media is diminished, Christian media becomes more crucial than ever. Kerby Anderson and the staff here at Point of View remain committed to providing wise, biblically based and truthful analysis of cultural trends and the events swirling around us. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Once again, we'll get some phone calls in just a minute. Of course, we're privileged to have in studio with us today Kelly Shackelford and Dr. Merrill Matthews. But the second article I've posted by Michael Barone's been on with us before, said, most people, he said, even just with a moments of reflection, might feel just a little, as he says, queasy about a private firm censoring the President of the United States and preventing him from effectively communicating with citizens over a chosen medium of universal reach. It's sort of like the death penalty. I mean, he has been banned from Twitter for life. And, where's the possibility of redemption, or maybe if the president changed his mind, that's the case. And then a little bit later in the article, he reminds us that we may not like certain kind of speech, but and there may be some concerns about what's called hate speech, but he still points out that a fair amount of what some people have been willing to call hate speech nevertheless is protected by the First Amendment, he says, under long-standing Supreme Court precedents.
But Kelly Shackelford, he's got quote after quote after quote from law professors saying, yeah, we just need to clamp down on that. And I'm going, would you listen to Alan Dershowitz or a couple of others that have always held to the idea that I may disagree with your view, but I will defend your right to be able to express that?
Yeah, it's. I mean, we're going to lose our country if we don't stop this. Free speech is one of the basic freedoms that our country was built upon. The marketplace of ideas. It's very crucial for religious freedom. I mean, if you think that if there's no free speech, you're going to have a chance to share the gospel, I mean, I think you ought to realize very quickly, you're going to be first on the list to be banned. So it's really important. But, it's like people have forgotten the ability to think beyond their immediate circumstance because people are real tempted to shut down other people's speech. And it's like they don't even see that, if the government can shut down their speech, then you're now giving them the power to shut down your speech. And it's all a part of this, we call it cancel culture. It really comes from an idea that speech is no different from action. And therefore speech, equals violence, which is just a lie. It's just not true. Just because you say something I disagree with, I'm not going to, as a Christian, I'm not going to say, well, I hate you and what you're saying is violent and therefore I have a right to do to you whatever I want. But this is the philosophy and it leads to incredible evil. And we're seeing that already. We're seeing it happen across the country. I think most Americans are very disturbed about what they saw from the tech companies over the last week. And look, the reason for free speech is not because it doesn't recognize that people are going to say things that are not nice, and that are maybe even harmful. It's that the alternative is much worse. That if you push speech underground, it gets uglier. The factions get smaller. And in fact, what you will have is violence. I've been sitting back wondering, with these tech companies clamping down on everybody's speech.
I know where you're going.
I've been worried that there's going to be some sort of attack on Facebook and Twitter and these groups because of what they're doing. Because I think people just they're not going to sit and be shut down and oppressed. And if there's no avenue for them to speak, this will bubble up. But this is why we have these things in our Constitution, because we know, our founders knew, they were very wise, and they studied all the other countries. They knew how important this was. The same thing for religious freedom. One of the reasons for religious freedom is not just the positive things, like, it's really only between you and God what your faith is, not the government. But one of them is a negative thing, that if you have the government tell people you have to choose me over God, those people, many of those people will say, I choose God, and now you have people who are not going to follow the laws. So there's just, and it'll lead to all kinds of things. So I wish people would think more about the idea of free speech and how important it is. And that includes not only the government, but it includes what these mega corporations who are so powerful, they really are more power. They're not, they have more money than 95% of the countries in the world. But more than that, I think they are more powerful than our own government right now. And especially when they're working with government a little bit, which is kind of what's happening now. Notice that none of this lockdown occurred on people's, Twitter or Facebook until the Democrats won those Senate seats in Georgia and therefore took control of all three branches of government. So we've got a combination even a little bit, and add Section 230, which gives them immunity. You've really got a combination. It's a dangerous thing.
Well, Amazon has largely been removed from this. We've mostly been talking about Twitter and Facebook. Amazon came into the light this week,
yes,
because it's one of the largest providers of cloud services. And so when they got criticized for shutting down Parler, Amazon released a list, a string of statements that are on there. Under Section 230, they are not allowed to permit certain things that incite insurrection, threaten to kill people, and other things. And you go through there, and I encourage people to go take a look at it. Some of these things are vile, hateful, racist things. And that's why Amazon said they had to shut this down because of what was going on there. And there was concern that people were using this as a way to coordinate their efforts to do other things. So we're at a point where we're going to have a debate about how much speech we're going to be able to have and so forth. But some of these companies are struggling. I know Jack Dorsey, isn't it, came out this week and said, well, I thought I was doing all right, but I may have overreacted on this. Yeah. We've seen Jeff Zuckerberg at some time say, well, we're not going to allow political ads, but now we're going to add them, and we don't want to restrict them. And they're struggling themselves, I think, to try to figure out how do you balance this in some way in order to be able to maximize free speech. And I actually heard the communication person from Parler on NPR this morning saying, we were struggling ourselves to try to figure out how we get some of these things off, because we want to maximize free speech, but we also don't want to have some of these things that could incite riots and so forth. So it's a tougher situation trying to figure out where you're going to be on this.
The problem is the double standard. That's the problem.
There is a double standard on some of this. Absolutely.
You've probably seen the reports where somebody took 10 minutes and just swept in, let's see what's on Twitter right now. And it was kill the president. It was Ayatollah Khomeini's Twitter account is still up, although he wants to exterminate the Jews. And he says these things. So the problem is they only seemed really willing to do this in one direction, and which creates a lot of skepticism. And again, you take down the president's account, you can take down anybody's account. And that's the danger. You look at the power that these people have, which I think goes back to the monopoly issue, and that we really need to. We're going to find out. I think people are right now trying to find alternatives to all these things. I don't know if it's possible. I mean, they've so, they're monopolies, and they've so pushed everybody out that I don't know if anybody can survive. We're going to find out. If they don't, it's just proof that you've got to have some breaking up of these companies, because they have way too much power, and there really isn't a free market economy with regard to this area.
Got a lot of phone calls, and we will get to those after the break. And let me be fair, because we do have Jack Dorsey's second thoughts. So I will try to read some of the questions he's had. And why are they reevaluating it? Well, that might be this article here that Twitter and Facebook have lost $51 billion of combined market value.
That'll get your attention.
That will. And that also brings us to one of the other articles, how everyday Americans can resist big tech, because I know some of the individuals around this table have dropped some of their social media accounts, and maybe you want to do the same. So, and I see some of the callers want to talk about that. So as soon as we come back, we'll take your calls. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation. In studio with us today, Dr. Merrill Matthews and Kelly Shackelford. We have almost a complete bank of phone calls here, so we'll get to those in a minute. But we did mention, and I want to give him his due, the CEO of Twitter is Jack Dorsey. And the other day, he made a comment that I thought was very powerful. He said, because he began to raise questions about his own organization, about the checks and accountability, and then made this statement, which I thought was very good. If folks do not agree with the rules and enforcement, we've always said they can go to another internet service. But that concept, he says, was challenged last week when a number of foundation internet providers also decided not to host what they found dangerous. In other words, his competition. Okay, so I'll give him credit where credit is due. We have seen some internal hidden camera interviews with Jack Dorsey, so
where he says this is just the beginning, and that there will be much more of this and a lot of other things.
But again, I want to be fair, in which he's had some second thoughts, and I wanted to read that. It goes on. He says, over the long term, it could be destructive to the noble purpose and ideals of the open internet. Matter of fact, one of the founders of the internet's running to redo this, creating pods and things like that. So there are some real concerns. And last week, I'm quoting from leaders in other countries, the ACLU. Oftentimes I say, Kelly, where's the ACLU on these religious liberty issues? Well, they're nowhere to be found. But on this issue, they finally said maybe this is just a bridge too far.
I will say to people, I mean, we're, First Liberty, we're looking at this as a very key issue. And so we will be, we're in coalition with a lot of national groups. So if people aren't following our information, if things pop up, we will let them know if we're taking action on different things. And they can just go to First Liberty. You spell it out, firstliberty.org. I know it's on pointofview.net. And just go down the page just a little bit, and it'll say "Be an Insider," and you can start getting the email once a week. But I just think this is too important. I mean, what good is religious freedom if there's no free speech? And so I think it's a time for everybody to really stand up and speak out and make sure that we preserve those principles that our country was built upon. Because, again, what a lot of people are doing is saying, well, it's really not a free speech issue because that's only protected in the First Amendment from the government. But, it really, if you lose free speech, you lose it. If you silence people, you lose, it happens. And we can't allow these major companies who are controlling all of the communication to decide that they're going to, control everybody else's communication.
Let me put one more quick thought in here, which is we're talking about the companies controlling this and silencing people, whereas the Democrats are saying they're being way too liberal and letting way too much happen out there. Now, who controls Washington now? And that is, you may not like it, but the fact that Democrats control Washington, every major corporation sees that, and even if they're sort of leaning towards that, they know who's stacking the books now. And when GM came out after Joe Biden wins, GM came out and said, "Well, we're dropping our suit against California about the smog and so forth, and and their efforts to try to make sure that we have all these electric cars, and we're going to produce all these electric cars." They know who's going to be in charge, and companies, if they're going to operate in the country, they've got to sort of live in that environment. So I suspect part of this is CEOs saying, we know we've got the Democrats are in charge, and they will make our life miserable if we don't play along to some extent. And you might say, well, you just need to stand up and fight them. Well, they can really make a company's life miserable. So we're going to, at least for 2 years, you know, if the House and Senate change, you may get some, but it's going to be a tough thing for a lot of companies because the Democrats control it.
Wow. Well, let's take some phone calls because we have almost a full bank of phone calls now. And we'll go to Clint in South Carolina. You have some comments about Twitter, don't you?
Oh, yeah. It's become obvious that the media.
Well, I guess we're having a little bit of difficulty with that. But maybe the question, if I can look on the screen, is the idea that people might want to do something besides Twitter. And that's one of the articles that we have here, how everyday Americans can resist big tech. If you say, well, Twitter already has lost Twitter and Facebook combined have lost $51 billion in market share. That's due, Kelly, to people, I think, even like you and your family that have said, maybe I'm not going to be on some of these social media sites.
Obviously, you've got things like Parler. You've got things like Rumble, Gab. I mean, there's a number of these things that people are going to as alternatives. Again, when then you have other people trying to take them out, other companies, you're wondering if they can survive when Amazon pulls their server. I don't know. I don't know if these other people can survive and compete. They're trying, and we'll see that. But yeah, I mean, for instance, when we saw what Amazon did to Parler, and my wife and I aren't necessarily. I mean, I had Parler, but I really wasn't using it that much. But when we saw what they did, it just sort of confirmed to us that I don't think I want to be providing any money to Amazon. And so we canceled our Amazon accounts, and we thought, it'll be better anyway if we order from local businesses rather than have Amazon put all of them out of business. And so, my wife's found substitutes for all the things we were getting through Amazon directly to the companies, and that's one of the ways we can make a difference in not having these companies become so powerful that we're like their slaves, and so everybody can do that to some extent, not only with a Twitter or a Facebook or these things, the other alternatives, but also with Amazon and the other companies who are they're taking over the land of America as they build these huge, massive distribution centers pretty much everywhere you go. And so that but that's because we give them that power, and that's up to us.
And one of the problems with Jack Dorsey's statement is that if a competitor starts doing really well, they go in and buy them.
That's right.
And so Instagram, YouTube, and all these become part of the bigger thing. So and in fairness, most of these small startups want them to come in and buy them.
Well, sure. Yeah, it's hard to turn that down, right?
It's hard to turn that down. So it is a challenge from a competitive standpoint, because if they don't sort of just squish you, they buy you, and then you lose that option.
And again, that fourth article we've posted there, how everyday Americans can resist big tech. The argument is Americans should divest themselves from all products, services, and applications that give big tech power over our lives. That can't be done exclusively because they have such power over our lives. But again, I wanted you to have that article in case you wanted to do something like that. Let's take another phone call here. We'll head out to Georgia. Bobby, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hey, how you doing?
Very good. What would you like to add to our conversation?
Okay, I just want to add on the speech that Donald Trump made. I mean, since Donald Trump been in office, he's been talking reckless. That was a reckless speech that he said on that podium on January 6th. And he's been talking reckless since he's been in office. He talked reckless not too long ago when he told the government, the Secretary of State in Georgia, to buy him votes. That's reckless. He's just a madman. And I want to make another quick statement on the reason why he lost. The reason why he lost the election, he got to blame it on himself, because he told his people not to do mail-in votes.
Okay, I think we got the point. We will take a break and come back with more right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Sometimes the verse in Jeremiah 29:11 has been misapplied since it originally was directed at the Jews in the Old Testament. It says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." A number of years ago, Chuck Bentley with Crown Financial Ministries illustrated that if you look at the previous verses, we find a blueprint for 4 steps to end poverty. Step 1 can be found in verse 5 that admonishes the Jews to build a house and settle down, and to plant a garden and eat from your own garden. Chuck says that this teaches that we are to take responsibility for our own welfare. Step 2 in verse 6 says that we are to marry and have sons and daughters, and that we are to increase, not decrease. We should have a growing family. What a contrast this is to the falling birth rates in the richest countries of the world. Step 3 is found in verse 7 that says, "Seek the peace and prosperity into the city." Prosperity is dependent upon the peace in our local community. Chuck says that we are to build enterprises that will assist others in the achievement of their goals and objectives. And Step 4 talks about the danger of false views and false theology. It can be found in verses 8 and 9 that warn, "Do not let the prophets and diviners among you deceive you." The problem with some attempts to alleviate poverty is that they fail to acknowledge the spiritual condition of the people. What we believe about God impacts our view of marriage, finance, children, education, government, and religion. Reducing and even ending poverty in our communities in the world will only be successful if we follow God's plan. Chuck Bentley provides a clear outline from God's Word of what we can do to end poverty. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you hear on Viewpoints by visiting pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Once again, as I said so often, the program waits for no one. We had to go to a break, and so we still have Bobby on the line. But just before I get back to Bobby, let's maybe Dr. Merrill Matthews, you had some comments about that phone call from the president to Georgia.
And I think Bobby was absolutely right. You can interpret that two ways. A lot of the things the president does, you can give him a generous interpretation or a less than generous interpretation. You can make the case, and it sounded a good bit like he's trying to get him to come across without saying that, 11,800 votes. He said, find me 11,800 votes. Do you mean just you want legal votes, or you mean illegal votes? How do you mean to do that? And it was very, very bad. It was a bad conversation by the president. I think Cleta Mitchell was on that call, if I remember right. She has resigned here recently. From the administration, it was a badly worded call. I don't know what the president was in trying to do, but even if Raffensperger had come up with 11,800 votes, he still loses Georgia, and he still loses. So I'm just mystified by this. But all these things play into the insurrection, don't accept the vote, and that just makes the Democrats that much more matter.
Bobby, any final comments?
Yeah, just 2 more comments on what Trump did. He opened the eyes to a bunch of people that never voted before.
Right.
So that's another reason why he lost the election. And Brian Kemp, I want to say, in my opinion, he took the election from Stacey Abrams. Stacey Abrams put a team together.
on what's there. But again, we talked about the other day where even Newt Gingrich was given at least partial credit to Stacey Abrams putting together an incredible kind of a machine
Absolutely.
in Georgia.
Kemp won the election, but not by much. That was the governor's race 2 years ago. Stacey Abrams has been a dynamo trying to get people registered and so forth, and she may be at least partially responsible for turning the state. I still think the state's probably red, but it's not as red as it used to be.
Find out in 2 years, won't we?
Well, and most people think that Trump's contesting, Georgia is what cost the Republicans those 2 seats in the Senate, because it really distracted a lot from their ability to campaign. And in fact, they were both much more far ahead. And what happened is the turnout kind of lowered in some of the more rural areas of Trump voters. So people will, say that Trump was the reason that those Republicans, that essentially the Republicans lost the Senate.
What about an individual that you know who was a lawyer that filed that case in Georgia that then lost the opportunity to be in a law firm that she's been in for 20 years? Talk about that.
Yeah, it was really another one of those disgusting examples of the types of things we're seeing. Cleta Mitchell is one of the best election law lawyers around.
Great person.
And she went to Georgia to look at the situation. She found a lot of things that she thought were real problems. And she provided those. They had a team out there. I mean, they filed a very, there are a lot of people, election fraud, or they're doing the machines, or all this. That was not this kind of lawsuit. This lawsuit was, look, there were 30,000 people who, voted who were not registered. There were, and it is specific numbers, specific names that were illegal votes. And that the lawsuit laid all those things out. So she was on that call with the president because it was essentially a settlement or a legal, when you have a lawsuit, sometimes the attorneys and the parties will sit down on a call and try to work through things. And so that was the conversation on the call. But because of the call, people on the left, and I'm not talking about liberals, I'm talking about more Marxist type people, they went, aha, we found somebody that we can go after. And so they have these machines that essentially where they go after and try to get people to lose their job. And so Cleta Mitchell had been a very respected attorney and partner at the law firm. She'd been there for 20 years at the same law firm.
Right.
And the law firm essentially, Cleta would say this, had no choice but to let her go because they had gotten so many of the clients to say that they were going to pull their business that they couldn't afford to keep her and lose, a huge percentage of their business. And so she was let go. They ended up working an agreement out. Is the way it was publicly done. And I'm sure she was paid handsomely. But that's the kind of thing it's really disgusting. It has no place in this country. The idea that people, lawyers, for instance, are supposed to represent their clients. And let me tell you something. If we get to a point in this country, and we're moving there very quickly,
that's my concern,
where lawyers have to be more susceptible to political pressure than to zealously representing their clients, you're not going to like that world. Because you'll never know if your client's representing you or outside political pressure, and that's a dangerous place to go. So again, very short-term thinking, hey, we'll punish somebody who disagrees with us or is on the other side. The result of what they're doing to the system is very damaging for everybody who wants justice or wants representation.
And to Kelly's point, I think Nancy Pelosi's bill, H.R. 1, puts in there, I believe it's H.R. 1, allows for more exposure of people who've made contributions and things of that nature, so that they can find out who these people are, and those various groups can go after them and try to dox them and criticize them and put more pressure on employers to pull back.
Meanwhile, the Supreme Court just took a case that's going to decide whether you can do that or not. I think they will decide no. We will see. But California was trying to do that, trying to expose nonprofits and who their donors are so that they can then be attacked. And the Supreme Court just took the case, and we'll see what they say about whether that's constitutional.
I've always been for transparency until I saw how that transparency has been using to dox individuals and cancel individuals and the rest. But let's go to, I guess it's Maine, WSEW. Joy, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, how are you? Thank you for having me on your radio station. I don't mean to switch gears again, but going back to the tech giants, I absolutely am in agreement with you as far as them having way too much power. And the owner of Twitter, that's wonderful. He had his comments, kind of a second thought. But to me, too little, too late. You knew what you were doing in the first place. You're smart enough to make a big company. You're smart enough to know the consequences of your actions before you start those actions. You know, I also wish, I know it won't happen, imagine if everybody who uses Twitter, who uses Facebook, one 24-hour period, just one day, and don't touch your computer. Imagine the power that people have. And I don't think people realize how much power we have to put them out and hit it where it hurts, in their money, in their pockets. You know, it's very unfortunate. You have a lot of people with businesses, you know, they make their living on Facebook, Twitter. They promote their whatever they do for their business. And then you have the millions of the young people, you know, the millennials, the teenagers. But I absolutely agree. You know, free speech, it has to be. And it's unfortunate that it's cut off. You know, if they can do that to the president of the United States, no matter who he is, who's next?
Yeah, it's a very good question.
You know, it reminds me of my mother telling me, remember that book, The Third Reich? It's turning into that. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you so much for giving.
You know, Joy's talking about this idea of maybe a digital fast, and that's exactly what your wife's been doing, right?
Yeah. My wife is just, you know, she doesn't like what she's been seeing anyway, so she's like, you know, I think I could be more productive in prayer, which is what she's been doing, you know, and is planning to do that through the 20th, certainly. That's been her goal, and so we had to actually, you know, she had to actually reinstall her app in order to do the little Facebook Live Bible study book club thing last night, and then as soon as she was done, she uninstalled it. So she's trying to stay off. But I mean, the Joy is right. I mean, the power is ultimately in our hands. Mm-hmm. The problem is that if you allow monopolies, they really take away your choice. I mean, you almost have to become a Luddite or kind of go into a cave. And they're taking away the beauty of our system, which is free market competition that brings on so much better, you know, quality, you know, service for people, things that I mean, those who serve the best win. But when nobody's allowed to compete, you miss out on all those things, and that's the danger to what's going on.
At least that's a fast I could probably stick to.
Yeah, his wife works on both the physical fast and the digital fast, and I'm very impressed with her. But we need to take a break, and we'll take some more phone calls. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
Sometimes I think about seeds. You ever stop to consider that some seeds become entire trees and some trees grow up and produce fruit? Other seeds become flowers or vines that bring us vegetables or berries. And some trees don't have fruit, but they're just pretty, especially in some parts of the country when it comes to the fall colors. Yeah, sometimes my mind goes off like that. And I also think about such things when it comes to the seeds that so many have planted in the quest to impact our nation through Point of View Radio. You may think that your gift is a small thing, but like a seed, it can grow to have an impact beyond your imagination. If you want to see beauty again in America, consider planting a seed today and making a difference by joining the Point of View Truth Team. Get the details today, right now, by visiting pointofview.net/team or call us at 1-800-347-5151. Plant a seed for a great future. Cultivate truth. pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Dr. Merrill Matthews and certainly Kelly Shackelford with us. And just before we take another phone call, because we have a number of phone calls there, we have a piece by Dr. Merrill Matthews, which I love. It's so titled, Wait, Pay-Go is Still a Thing? Who Knew? And it gets back to something I have in this booklet on debt, and that is the fact that we've always had, theoretically, the idea that you would try to balance a budget. Well, we gave that up decades ago, but at least in the House of Representatives, they had a rule called pay as you go, called Pay-Go, and it was tempting to try to discourage and to prevent Congress from taking any kind of legislative action that would increase the deficit, which we've been increasing, Dr. Merrill Matthews, in ways I would never have imagined even this time last year because of the stimulus. And, of course, now Joe Biden wants to spend $2,000 per person again, so this is something that is amazing. But the reason you brought it up is because the other day the House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, said, oh, my gosh, we should be paying attention to Pay-Go. And I thought, what? We still have that?
And that's right. And it came up in 2007. In fact, in 2006, after 6 years of Republicans who had been spending an awful lot of money, the Democrats ran on fiscal responsibility. I'm not kidding.
Yeah, I know.
That's what they ran on in 2006. And they got and they won the House on that and said that we're passing Pay-Go. And Pay-Go is pay as you go. And what it means is if you're passing legislation that increases the federal spending or reduces revenue by a tax cuts or something, you have to offset that with something else. And so they did that as a saying of saying we're doing fiscal responsibility. When Democrats took the Senate in 2009 with Barack Obama, they came up and said, well, we need to spend $800-900 billion on a stimulus. We're going to set Pay-Go aside because that's kind of getting in our way. So they voted to set it aside, and they frequently vote to set it aside, or else they just ignore it. So they have not been paying any attention to Pay-Go. And if you go to IPI.org, you'll see this piece there, and I have a graph there from the Federal Reserve Bank,
which makes my hair hurt. It's so bad. Yeah,
which shows you federal debt. And it had been going up, but once you hit 2008, when the Democrats are in control in the House, it just starts going up faster, and then it just goes up even faster. It's going straight up right now. And so now Joe Biden's coming in saying we need to spend nearly $2 trillion. That's only going to be the first installment. He's already saying we've got some more money spending we want to do. Pay-Go is going to be set aside, and there will be no attention paid to this notion that we all need to offset any spending or tax cuts.
What we're doing to our kids and our grandkids.
Yep, it's really sad because really the cynical reason that all these things happen is because they know that this stuff is going to come due, but they know it won't come due, on their term, and so they're willing to do irresponsible things, knowing that other people are going to have to pay the check.
And it's not just irresponsible. It's in the sense of I'm covering myself. So I'm saying we've got Pay-Go out here we need to pay attention to. So people think, oh, well, they're trying to be fiscally responsible, even as they pass spending after spending.
Again, I would encourage you to read the article. Also go to IPI.org because you certainly should support that organization as we encourage you to support First Liberty. But let's take some more phone calls because a few of these I think will be very interesting. One is in Missouri, KNEO. Kay, thank you for calling today. I think you want to share a story of an individual you met from North Korea.
No, not that I met. I listened to the. Oh, okay. It was on YouTube, and I listened to her interview. And anyway, it's Yeoman Park. It's the little girl that defected and is in America. And she tells her story. And if Americans don't pay attention to what's going on to other countries that, North Korea wasn't always like North Korea, but for 70 years it is. And she tells that when she got here, she couldn't even think for herself because they are so programmed in that country because there is no television except one channel that is all day long. That is just, if you even can see a TV, is all day long what the Kim Jong wants on there all the time. And that they're starved to death. And if they keep them in that kind of a situation, then they don't have any problem with the people. So, I mean, this is a down the road, but it didn't start like one day it was this way and the next. It's a slow, little progressive thing. When you take the rights of people to speak away that you disagree with, you will end up in one of those states. Like, everybody should watch this. It was on Valuetainment. I don't even know what that is. I just happened to see her picture there, and I thought, well, I would like to hear what she has to say. Very intelligent young lady, not angry, and just speaking about what it was like and how she would have gone back to North Korea, as bad as it is, if they just had promised to give her some food, because she could not think for herself after all those years of being under that. So.
Yes. Well, again, I think her point's well taken. You know, the difference between North Korea and South Korea, you can see this on a map. We talked about this a while back with Wayne Grudem, put the video up, and you could see the darkness of North Korea and the light of South Korea. These were actually one country, and not only the physical darkness, but the spiritual darkness. But again, this is what happens when you finally are in a full totalitarian regime. You just can't think for yourself. You can't even think. You can't put logic together or anything.
Well, and that's why I know we've talked about the book before, Live by, Not by Lies. I mean, that's what it does, is it interviews people from these former totalitarian countries. And the ones that are living in the United States now are terrified at what they're seeing. To a one, not a single one that he interviewed was not terrified, because we're seeing it. And we recognize what's going on. I mean, this idea that you either have to think the official way or you get punished. The companies, controlling now all of our speech, the crackdowns in so many different areas that we never. I mean, we just had AOC yesterday state that she's been talking to her fellow Congress people, and that they're going to have a commission, a truth commission, to oversee the media. And you're like, that's so outrageous that even, I saw many Democrats when this became public running for cover. It was like, but I mean, just think of this. The government is going to school the media in how to be better in covering truth because they're going to tell them what they need to cover and not cover. I mean, this is like Orwellian stuff that we could have never even believed anybody would say such a thing, maybe just 3 or 4 years ago. And now she's proudly saying this.
We have more than once have quoted from Glenn Greenwald, and this is an individual that probably doesn't agree with a lot of things we say around this table. Calls himself left of center. An individual said, I didn't vote for Trump, but he was horrified by the fact that you had this complete media, big media, and also big tech, which now some people are starting to call maybe deep tech. You have the deep state and the deep tech, which said, we're not going to cover any of this. And so when he wanted to cover that, his partners in an organization he started so there wouldn't be censorship were going, no, you're not going to say that either, and had to leave his own company that he actually established.
And that was the Hunter Biden issue, wasn't it?
Yes, the Hunter Biden issue and the laptop issue. And so you're hearing individuals that are not necessarily people around the table. ACLU, you have the heads of Brazil and Mexico and Germany starting to speak out about this, and the Glenn Greenwalds, and of course Alan Dershowitz, you knew he would for some time. And it just, I think, illustrates again that this is more than just the left, right, Republican, Democrat. People recognize what might come in the future in this regard.
Yeah, this is an existential moment. I mean, this is a moment where, and I think people realize this, they're looking at this and they're saying, this looks very dangerous. This could go in a really bad direction. And it's the using of the crisis for, I just saw Dennis Prager's interview where he talked about this, and he's a Jewish man who has studied Germany, and he says this is very like in the methodology of what happened right at the beginning after Hitler came into power. He was just in power a month, and they had burned down their legislature,
Reichstag,
the Reichstag, and soon they said it was because of the inflaming, because of the content from their enemies, from people who disagree with them, and they literally passed a law to shut down the speech.
And the challenge that they're going to have is what's the remedy to it? If you feel like big tech has too much power, what do we do? And the Democrats are going to step in. We'll have a government commission to oversee this, and I suspect you'd find some Republicans who might be willing to go along with that. And all of a sudden, now you've got the government overseeing this.
Yes, and there was a piece the other day that came out in National Review where saying, the standard argument is, well, these are private companies, but he even pointed out there was a Supreme Court precedent that simply said, sometimes the government can, if you will, just send it over to the private companies and kind of say, just keep doing what you're doing. And as you pointed out, there's going to be a lot of agreement with that by the Biden administration. We've got a lot of phone calls. We'll take those right after these important messages.
The jarring events of the past year, and especially of recent weeks, have further divided an already divided nation and rocked the sensibilities even of Bible-believing Christians. In 2021, we're certainly not out of the woods. In fact, going forward, things may get difficult for Christians. As the pandemic rose, some churches took financial hits. Others found it difficult to adapt technologically. All churches had to make changes, but wise pastors reassured their congregations that the gospel does not change just because there's a pandemic, or riots in cities, or an election, or threats to our constitutional republic. This is the right message for all Christian organizations. Rich Bott, chairman and CEO of the Bott Radio Network, put out a letter stating that his organization will do what it has always done, proclaim the truth of God's Word. Mr. Bott says the network's format does not depend on who is in the White House or whatever political winds are blowing. That's important because when you add the dramatic politics of the past couple of months to the rest of 2020, there's a certain weariness that's set in among Christians. A couple of veterans of the football world described this in a Wall Street Journal op-ed entitled, "A Call for Christian Revival in 2021. Former player and coach and Pro Football Hall of Fame member Tony Dungy and Benjamin Watson, director of NFL programs for Pro Athletes Outreach, conclude that religious leaders are exhausted. They point out that too many churches are too reluctant to point to biblical truth out of fear of criticism from secular culture. But Christians need leaders who will not compromise truth. This is especially true for leaders who run Christian media outlets. As Americans' trust in media is diminished, Christian media becomes more crucial than ever. Kerby Anderson and the staff here at Point of View remain committed to providing wise, biblically based and truthful analysis of cultural trends and the events swirling around us. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
For a few more minutes, let me just mention that the inauguration is next week. And, of course, next Friday we'll have kind of a look at what that means. And by then, I think we're going to know a whole lot more. But let's go back to some phone calls. South Carolina, WAGP. Gail, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hi, and I thank you guys again for what you do. 2 points that I wanted to say. The lady that talked about the big tech companies and how, we have gotten to be so dependent on them of keeping in contact with families and friends and whatnot, that we've just allowed these people to just do whatever they want to. If they can censor a president, like you guys have been saying all day, they can censor anybody. The gentleman from Georgia, And I think right now the Democrats feel that they're riding high. You know, they have no worries. If they did it to President Trump, eventually some Democrat is going to make them upset, and they're going to do it to them. You know, we somehow, like your wife, we need to take a fast, especially Christians across this nation, need to take a fast from all of big tech and see how well their pocketbook feels after a week or whatever. Yeah, this is scary. America is really looking scary to me.
Well, again, let me just mention the fourth article here goes into some detail about how everyday Americans can resist big tech. And a digital fast, not a bad idea anyway, just in terms of the impact that the digital world sometimes has on our brains.
Yeah, and hopefully alternatives can be found.
Yes. And we're finding some of those.
Yeah, and we're going to find out. I mean, can Parler survive? Can these different alternatives survive, what the power that these people have, and especially now that they're kind of, in lockstep a little bit with government friends who would like to work with them. So we're going to find out real soon, and if not, we've got a real problem on our hands because I just don't know how much confidence I have in these antitrust lawsuits that have been filed. We've got both federal ones and state against these folks, but again. It's hard to say this, but these companies have more power than our government does. I mean, they have more powerful lawyers, they have more money, disposable money, and I think if the people can't do this, then I think we're in trouble.
And my sense is, at least for Facebook, that tends to be an older population these days. My understanding is most of the young kids go to Instagram or something else.
Yeah.
And so but I know, Kerby, you said that you don't tend to use it much anymore. I hardly ever use Facebook. Use Twitter every now and then when I post something. So I look at it just to sort of see what's happening, but I don't do very much on it. And it may be, I'm just wondering if people are actually beginning to get, I'm a little tired of being on these things all the time because it takes an awful lot of time, right. And it can drain your energy just as you're looking at this saying, what in the world's happening out there?
And I would go to your websites. Again, I'll plug ipi.org and firstliberty.org. I'd rather read the whole article, and sometimes when you're limited by, used to be 140 characters, now it's 280. I mean, I get a little tired of the superficiality of some of that, too.
I think a lot of people who respond to my pieces in The Hill, oftentimes with vile language and so forth, I can't imagine they did anything but read the headline.
Yes.
Because you get the sense you look through it and say, what are you talking about? I mean, didn't even say that.
I didn't even say that.
Yeah, I think, one of the things we've done, and I know Buddy and others have probably done the same thing, is we've begun to tell our own folks, look, you've got to get the information directly from us.
Right.
So like with us, it's like if you're not on our insiders alert, you're not going to know a lot of what's going on. Additionally, the First Liberty Live. So when we do a new video, which we do interviews with different people on the key issues or what, if you get this information directly, you don't have to rely. These people won't be able to censor that. And we've moved that way because of what we've seen, especially that, everything is now being controlled. And so obviously we're like everybody else right now who's out there, and I'm sure businesses are the same way. We've got our own servers. We're building to where we can be okay if these major companies start to try to pull the rug out from under us so that we can't communicate.
Again, you mentioned First Liberty Live, you also have some of the various lunches that you have at IPI. So again, I'd rather sit there and watch a long interview with one of you. Of course, some of the people listen to Point of View for 3 hours. I appreciate the fact that they do that, but you're going to learn a lot more instead of the soundbite kind of stuff. So.
Right. Well, the other thing about listening to Point of View is very few places can you listen to that are going to give you accurate information. I mean, the news, the media they have agendas, whereas the agenda here is pretty open, which is try to look at things from a biblical viewpoint, try to analyze what's going on. But they know that when they listen to Kerby Anderson, that Kerby's going to have his facts straight, and he's not going to say things that are not backed up. And we're going to express opinions, and everybody's free to disagree with opinions. But it's at least a place where people can trust that they know that what they're hearing is true, and that all the information, the good and the bad, is going to be laid on the table, and people are going to be able to come to their own conclusions.
Just maybe get one of these calls from Nevada, KNLB Bonnie. You have some comments about how, indeed, the incoming administration is going to deal with the pandemic. Since we got Dr. Merrill Matthews here, I wanted to get your comments and his comments. So, Bonnie, what would you like to add?
A few things. Number one, you guys are on Twitter a lot more than you think because I listen and I tweet a lot. Whenever
well, that's great.
You're speaking. This morning was one of those times. Kelly was laying some stuff out, and I just was like, well, I took advantage of the retweet, quote tweet. So I think 6 went out, so I could add.
Well, I hope you won't be deplatformed this soon.
You know what? If I am, I'm on Gab, and the Lord's got me covered. The Lord put a message in my heart so many years ago of so that the world may know. And
Amen.
I thought it was to do with my injuries from my car accident. I'm living with what's considered emergency problems with my body from a car accident sitting in a red light for 8 years now, January 3rd. And my rib cage is torqued, my spine is pulled in 2 different directions, and my collarbone and shoulder blade are shoved inward, which are the ones that pushed my rib cage. So praise the Lord, I'm alive. And bedbound, so I'm able to listen to Point of View, every day, and steal on the weekend. But what I wanted to lay out was Biden laid out his plan for helping the American people. And it is like, I don't know, verbatim what President Trump has already been trying to do.
I saw an outline of it, and you're absolutely right, Bonnie. I looked at that and I thought, this sounds like the Trump plan. Did I miss something? Is this mislabeled? Because it was simply get out vaccines, wear a mask, socially distance, and wash your hands or something. It was like 4 or 5 points. It was no major difference.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, and this one here, he's talking about, more unemployment money for the American people, business loans, everything for the American people that Trump wanted that Pelosi was blocking is what Joe Biden laid out. Like,
wow.
I'm your savior. So, yeah, no.
I got to go to a break, unfortunately, but good point.
The only big difference I see is the one where they want hundreds of billions of dollars to go to their state and cities that they want to go to. So it's sort of a way to pay back their own party folks who maybe didn't handle their own budgets.
And I will say this, the media will be amazed at how great they think the Biden plan is.
Yes. And also, I'm afraid the Biden plan is going to close down some churches, and Kenley is going to be busy. So go to firstliberty.org and IPI.org because these 2 individuals are worthy of your financial support. And we appreciate both of you being in here today. So it's going to be a great opportunity this week to see what happens. We have an inauguration. Of course, we'll have our weekend edition next week. So again, I hope that you will join us. If you find yourself saying, I want to read some of these articles because you've been quoting all sorts of things, I need to read these. Okay, and they're all available at the website, pointofview.net. Most importantly, I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. And I hope you have a great weekend. And we will see you back here on Monday, right here at Point of View.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.